And welcome, Titans, to Titans of Today, episode 48. We have Judith M. Peterson, the CMO of DwellFi, and we're going to be talking about discernment and how important it is for leaders and workers, people who are building, to understand what truly creates value and the power of discernment. Judith, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I am very excited to have this conversation with you, Jacob.
Me as well. A lot of value to unpack here, but let's begin at a surface level. How do you view discernment and why it is so critical to really embed that in the way that leaders and everyday people are approaching their lives?
Great question and great foundational question, because I believe that discernment separates strategic leaders from tactical executors. With AI being faster and cheaper, right? Judgment is the layer above all of that, and it's exceptionally more valuable. So I think that's a good baseline to start. That's how my experience has led me to that perspective.
And at DwellFi, talk about what the work is you do there and some of the experiences that you've had in your own work life with applying discernment.
Great. Another great question. You're 2 for 2. That'll get old quickly. I'm very fortunate at DwellFi because the founders are engineers, right? And certainly I have worked in the asset management industry at a hedge fund, a fund of funds. I have worked selling technology into them. I've worked with fund administrators. So what's interesting about DwellFi is there's a real need, obviously, in a manually intensive environment, which a lot of fund administration is, and a lot of private funds in the fund industry, it's very manually intensive. So AI is perfect for that. So for me to work in an environment where engineers solve business problems with technology, Judith is frequently solving growth challenges with marketing. So with all those things collided, first of all, I saw a huge opportunity for this technology. We do blockchain and AI, enterprise AI, and also we have portion of our technology does tokenization. That's a whole other story. That's a whole other podcast. But what's interesting in marketing AI technology and thinking about manually intensive processes, which is, again, a lot of what you and I talked about, which I appreciated. I personally, because we're a startup, needed to figure out how to get more marketing with myself, a part-time project manager and an executive assistant, right? What's been interesting at this point in my career is to really redefine and build an entire MarTech stack with AI tools, which is, I believe, the blueprint for growth in companies and people personally. So I'll stop there and say that's what Judith does for DwellFi. A founding member and a steering committee person for the Women's Accelerator Network. So I am also encouraging as many people who will listen to me to get involved in AI, because I think that's an opportunity.
Definitely. So as we're looking about applying those two questions really together, discernment in the age of AI, you built out this MarTech stack that is heavily AI-based. How are you executing your marketing plans and reaching the market and really deriving understanding about what matters to them, and then teaching or leading your people to also understand and apply that same level of discernment in their careers, in their efforts in that stack that you're delivering? And why is it important that leaders understand a little bit more about what you understand when it comes to discernment?
So I learned by getting my hands dirty. I was Department of One pretty much. And I had to figure out, I'm a salesperson's marketer and I love feeding sales guys. So I had to figure out how to create volume and precision. You and I have talked a lot about how authenticity in the age of AI, which is, I know, going to be a separate question, but I think it's very important to create content and engage. We live in a world where people are digitally saturated. Everybody is just overwhelmed, digitally saturated, and just overwhelmed. So to create the precision of, and I'm talking about how Judith uses the tools versus DwellFi is selling into those markets. But in a way, it's a very similar problem, right? huge manually intensive. It's hard to solve some of the growth and precision challenges in sales and marketing these days without thinking about some BA tools. And to be blunt, a lot of people are thinking really on a very task level with some of the public tools that are out there. They're not thinking strategically. So to the tail end of your question was like, where does discernment come in? You're still going to be a bit on the habit trail or the hamster wheel or whatever you call it. If you're just thinking at a task level about it, right? So there were two things that happened, I suppose, when I went on this journey, this odyssey, right, to try and figure this out. And again, I'm fortunate I work in an environment with a bunch of nerds who solve problems, think of solving business challenges with technology. Was very supported in trying to figure this out and trying to use my expertise and apply it from a process and workflow perspective to marketing and kind of revenue operations. The discernment component was on two levels. One, I needed to apply my own expertise to set the base layer with a lot of the AI stuff because it did, to your point, remove a lot of the manually intensive tasks, which, right, you think about a large language model and how it learns and how many words it can learn versus what a human can learn, but it still needs discernment from a person to tell it outcome. In terms of, I don't want to collapse things, but in terms of how I then started teaching junior staff discernment, which is a whole other conversation. Junior people don't tend to think discernment so earlier on in their careers.
Mhm.
No, because I need one. And
We talked about one of the examples, and there's definitely many, is me teaching my wife how to do video editing.
Yeah.
And so she did video editing probably a decade or so ago. As part of her education, she worked at a news station for a while. She's from South America and then moved to the United States, so she stopped doing it. And obviously the tools have advanced significantly since then. And I was actually reading a paper. It was by Meter, Model Evaluation and Threat Assessment. Essentially what they were saying is that the ability of models to deliver on tasks doubles every 7 months. So if you extrapolate that out over the next 5 years, what that leads to is that by 2030, AI will be able to essentially off a single line prompt or just basic prompting, will be able to do a month-long software project pretty much in an instant, right? So tremendous ability there. But when it comes back down to her and that learning experience, the insight of the paper is that as long as someone can do something right once, then it could essentially be taught and imparted to AI. And so the question is, what is doing it right once? And our current day, in the way it works, you can do something just to do the task. You can go through and click all the 50 buttons that are required. And that's pretty much what we've done for however many years in human civilization in many different tasks, right? Let's say sales. Sales is a great example. Your phone calls, your emails, you're finding the data, you're prospecting, and that whole thing, it's been this continuous cycle that we brought technology into. But essentially, in the age of AI, as we're now talking about, this discernment is key because it's now about doing the task, but why it matters, and really making it matter more. So if we look at some of the success stories that I've seen personally, and you've probably seen many of these as well, is a lot of these products that go viral excel at not just doing the thing. They don't just have the good technology or the good platform or the good service. They excel in discerning what matters to people, their customers, and then delivering that through some compelling video or set of articles or things that move people, right? And that requires discernment, and it requires removing yourself from the task to focus on what within that task really creates value.
I should let you finish your thought, but I'm excited to share with you. I appreciate the way that you laid that out, because one of the things that I did, not to get down a rabbit hole, but one of the things that I did, which was, I call it ABM on steroids, right? Account-based marketing on steroids. We would have discovery calls, which is where all the juicy bits are, what the questions people ask. And when you think about either an emerging tech or an emerging asset class, which is predominantly where I've spent a lot of my career, you're educating and influencing. Back to your definition, right? How do you create value, right? You're educating and influencing. You're trying to move people to a state of education where they can make a decision. Not your decision, but the best decision that's valuable for them. And in an age of AI where it's just everything is so new, and you think about how people normally make a decision. You said it beautifully. You buy a piece of technology to solve a problem. In an age of AI, what's interesting on an enterprise level is people don't really know how to make a decision about something that's so expansive. So in my case, in the marketing department where I had control over everything, and the data obviously that I was using was not investor data or anything that was compliance oriented, right? It was just IP, basically, our intellectual property. I saw patterns, and I would hear patterns on sales calls about issues that would come up, things that people wanted to know or they were trying to figure out. I ended up building a workflow to harness from the CRM system patterns and insights, that I would normally hear. So I would define all that so that we could hyper target either clients. Again, it's ABM on steroids, because you can do that all the time. Then going back to what you and I just talked about a little bit ago, now the precision comes in. So historically, I think people have thought that solving sales problems were around volume. What's interesting in the age of AI is that you can solve growth and sales. We've shortened our sales cycle because we figured out how to harness and create precisions. And I think that kind of goes back to the precision. To me, is a form of discernment. Precision involves discernment directing it, right? To your point, humans still have to get the insight, see the pattern, and then figure out how to use the technology to remove the manual task-oriented stuff so you can have more of those aha moments or get visualization. You get the intuition that, hey, I think I'm hearing a pattern, I'm seeing a pattern, and then leverage the technology to just remove all the stuff that's mind-numbing. So I appreciate the fluidity of this conversation, because I do remember when we were talking about how do people learn. People historically have learned a task, then you learn how to manage multiple tasks and project managed. Then you move from managing tasks to people. And so what I am finding interesting is teaching discernment or mentoring or whatever discernment to people that are thinking very task-oriented. Very elegantly a little bit ago before we started, which I thought was interesting. And I'd love to hear you say it again, because I think that it's really interesting how the kind of evolution of AI and tasks.
To really go from a task level, you have to detach yourself and connect to a totally different set of flow functions that really drive the task. So if you're inside of the tool, the answer is likely not inside of the tool, because you can become more effective, and effectiveness is judged essentially by the KPI and the output, but the efficiency is going to happen within the tool. But between the efficiency and the effectiveness, discernment is what creates the effectiveness. Greater efficiency or scale of the ability to perform the task comes from likely detaching yourself from the tool. Once you achieve that level of efficiency, then you can look outside of it and see the interconnectedness between your tool, your publishing platform, and your content generation platform, your AI, to see that here's how I can streamline the process so I can do 10, 15, 30, doesn't even matter, an arbitrary number, times more work. Then all your effectiveness comes down to what you're talking about. That's deriving insight from conversation, because two people can listen to the exact same thing in a sales call. One person will know exactly what the person is saying, and the other person will think it was something based off of either their bias, or they weren't actually listening, or they just will miss what that person was really saying, because in sales calls, it's a delightful prospect if you get somebody that really tells you exactly what their problem is. And that's actually what really moves them versus what's just on their mind at the time. So it requires that full funnel insight.
Or to your point, I really appreciate the craftsmanship of salespeople, because the real salespeople don't ask the question that you answer. They extract from the person. And this is a whole other thing, but they know how to extract, not because they know where you're going, but they help the person. One of the things I appreciate about you, and it's clear that you are someone that is a good business person, because I knew how I felt about some of these things, and I've been on a journey to articulate it to try and help others. And I appreciated the way that we had a conversation about it, because you extracted even more from me. It speaks the craft of how you're good at what you do. So thank you. What is very interesting about what you just said, and I know you're supposed to be interviewing me, but I find you fascinating. So I'm just going to, anyway. Hopefully people will find this. That one of the things I think is interesting that you said, which I didn't realize, I've written about it, but I don't think I realized that the KPIs, in a way, and this goes back to your comment about what creates value and authenticity, because people presume that things are going to get dumbed down with AI. And again, the discernment layer, it's all how you get out of it what you need, right? You and I joked that if I say to my husband, go over there and get me whatever, I will. But the clarity and the discernment to ask for a particular outcome, and it is interesting. What's been interesting about the KPIs as we've gone on this journey with sales is I've worked at places where it's a bit of a sweatshop, because I think historically people have only felt comfortable with volume-based KPIs for marketing. And what's fascinating is our KPIs have shifted slightly. Our numbers may not be quote unquote as high, but because we're the precision, right? So we've shortened the time frame on the sales cycle. We've given salespeople back hours of time, the marketing department, to help them focus on higher value tasks, because I will get a more precise draft of something based on these discovery calls that they don't really need to edit. The back and forth between marketing people and either product or sales, everybody wants to blow their brains out, right? Because when you work at a large company and it's, oh, I have to wait 2 weeks for this because we have this large, you can be very agile with marketing and more responsive. But the KPIs, I think, are going to shift to you said it very well. They're shifting, and they're more around the engagement and the absorption because of the precision, right?
Exactly. You used that word again. I was going to bring that back up, but precision. And the precision comes from essentially being as close to the customer as possible in as many conversations, in as many, and high value. So what I'm getting at here is when you say that AI can free people up to do more high value tasks, let's say specific to salespeople, that high value task is not always prospecting, though targeting and focusing on the right people is important. But if you can automate that, which is a much easier task to automate, because if you look at, there's Kunal Mehta, who was on my podcast, talked about propensity models. And a propensity model is basically what customers are most likely to buy. So if you have 100 customers and you have sufficient data about those customers, then you can know, and with much greater certainty, what accounts are actually going to buy your product. And he said that the close rate, either, I can't remember exactly, but it was either 80% higher or it was a 80% close rate if they were really focused in on what that account and the match was. So let's say you have this model which could solve essentially your prospecting through just the data aspect. Let's focus, instead of these 800 accounts, let's focus on these 100 accounts because we know that they fit our model. And then on top of that, when it comes down to, again, solving for prospecting, you have the data about the account, then you have the data about the people or the buyer title, then you have the actual information by which to get a hold of them, then you have the personalization, which that's where sort of your precision begins to be directed towards that person, your ability to customize a relevant message that breaks the pattern and isn't just the same copy paste that they're going to get from somebody else. And that actually happens with most salespeople. That's actually why I got into AI, because I realized after 8 years that I was just copy pasting. Of course, I personalized them, but more or less hey, your job is to come in here and send 100 messages, kind of like what you're talking about with volume. That's what it still is for a lot of salespeople. Hey, your job is to come in and send 100 messages. But anyways, back to that, to solve for prospecting, to free human salespeople up, you then have that personalized message, which you want to reach that person through email or call or text or what have you. And then ultimately it's about presenting your value and knowing what creates value. That's where the discernment comes in. And the best source of that is going to be talking to more customers and having enough feedback and interaction to the point where you can say, this is the value proposition, this is the pain point that really matters, and then communicating that in a succinct way. So that's your prospecting process. And if you're able to automate that, then you're freeing your salespeople up to do more time on the calls with clients where they can derive the real insight, which they should feed back in. And I'm probably speaking to you having done this many times, but the precision in essence does come from volume, but it comes from quality, the volume of quality.
The heat, do you know what I mean? And decide, everyone always wants to put out thought leadership, but when you're able to really hear things and be able to be responsive to that in a way that, and again, you think about how people consume content. Again, we're at your eyeballs are saturated. I joke with people that if you don't figure out how to communicate, say LinkedIn, I work in B2B predominantly, and you think about how people consume in their personal life, right? Video shorts. I know LinkedIn is starting to do that now, but the way that people used to read a newspaper, listen to the news, whatever it is, like their attention span for whatever it is. So if you don't, and this speaks to the discernment layer, the lexicon that you learn from having those conversations, that's where the trend originates. You
Exactly.
talk about how someone's understanding something and they're articulating it. I find, and also like people don't get into sales to talk at people. Hopefully, as you mature in your career, you're talking with, not at. Same with marketing. I always joke with marketers when they say, what have you learned? I said that just because you're talking does not mean someone's listening.
Very true.
So what I think is interesting, and again, I so appreciate the craft of a good salesperson. I had my own business for 8 years, and at a time when people were not handing out money to female entrepreneurs. So I had to go out and sell. So I wouldn't say I was great at it. It was a necessity. And I think it has shaped me as a marketer because I'm always about feeding the sales guy. Frequently you work for a CEO, but hopefully you have a commercially minded environment. Because when sales are fed, lots of other things take their place in priority. But a real good salesperson starts to put the patterns together because they know how to listen. And to your point, getting those nuggets and creating an environment, that to me is really what sales is, creating the environment for people to talk to you about how they'd love to see things differently.
And how can you take this to a deeper level for us in terms of maybe some particular examples or just ways that discernment can be utilized across the everyday professional's life in terms of like an entrepreneur or an investor or, again, a professional? Talk a little bit further about some of the examples that you've had in your personal life. Let's just focus there on you were working with ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. It produced this outcome. And then you had to, and it seemed convincing because it always does. It's like very eloquently expressed. But then you had to be sure, you had to break some of the things off and say, you know what, that doesn't matter to my customer. This is what's important. Or some examples like that.
I can actually give you a very personal, because I just taught a master class to a bunch of women who were senior women in the asset management industry. And what I find interesting, so to answer to your question succinctly, I would say there are times, and this speaks to discernment with outcome, right? How do you want someone to feel after they've read something? Because a very intelligent salesperson I know once say to me, how do they need to hear it? So when you think about prompt engineering, not every set of ears is the same. And the more that I can know about the persona, I'm a very audience-driven marketing person. And I joke because I market a lot into the private funds. And I joke that no one in the alternative crypto people, digital assets, no one in that industry needs a free drink in a beige room. That is if you're trying to get people, and I'm seeing people post about their events and I'm like, do you even want to go to your own event? There's no fun or discovery. These are people that are hedging two data sets in their head at any given time looking for alpha, right? So when you think about knowing your customer, back to you said it earlier, right? What I think is interesting about some of the output on public tools is that unless you have the discernment to really know who and how they need to receive, right? It's almost like, what is their love language or what is their whatever language? How do they need to get it, right? I would say in my core, I'm a go-to-market strategist. Target market, message distribution. Where do they need to get it? How are they going to consume what you're doing? So output's only as good as the prompt engineering, the discernment. That to me is at its base level, that is what prompt engineering is. You're prompting it to tell you what you need for a particular outcome to understand what that is. So when I don't get something that's, or it's really just off or vanilla or pedestrian, I need to go back to the drawing board to think about who because I know what resonates with, when you really know your customers, you get more granularity. Everybody's different. One of the campaigns that was interesting that I had done for DwellFi when we were hiring engineers, not my normal audience. I'm a good nerd storyteller, but I wouldn't say that I really understand engineers and what they care about. And obviously, engineering talent is at a premium, right? So what do people care about? I was stunned when I did a survey for a lot of the engineers that work at DwellFi. What was important to them? I was like, they're not marketing people. They're sometimes internal and whatever. So I think to your point, what is just fascinating, and the way that I get at that, what's interesting about what you're saying is that there are times, if they let us, I will record discovery calls and I will tell people, look, we're not going to use your name. It was interesting just even recording the session with these senior women. It was almost like a focus group. And then to take that transcript and put it into Perplexity or Claude or whatever you want to use and say, what are the themes? What are people saying? Because you have the actual transcript where they are emoting. And that is a fascinating way to sometimes get a different perspective when it crystallizes it and say right from that place. And I think a lot of the tools actually are starting to evolve to allow you tone and style brand things that you can upload. But that's the difference between open versus a closed network. When you create a closed network, which a lot of clients have been asking me to help their marketing departments with an AI blueprint, there's so much gold in probably the CRM system. There's so much stuff just sitting around that people had, or perhaps a salesperson left that really had some great sales decks or whatever it is. Sometimes we all pull slides from different places historically because I like the way that they did that or whatever. When you think about it, we do that. We hadn't done that historically. AI, you can set things up in a closed network. And then again, I think some of the tools are trying to get to that place. You're going to teach some of that discernment to the tool. There still has to be a human element.
Yeah. No, this is great. And actually, you're fueling my thought engine significantly when it comes to product innovation. So very fruitful.
I'm flattered by that, actually.
But you mentioned the last thing you said there, and it connects right in. The human element matters. Because this goes back to what the quote it brings up is neuro-linguistic programming, which is the whole Tony Robbins. And actually before that, it was Richard Bandler. Really just how you communicate messages to the human mind in a way that can create rapid change faster than many other things, which we try like therapy and whatnot. And what they say is very relevant to marketing is that the way the message, the content of the message is not what's important. And of course, there's a little qualifier around that. But what matters is what the true meaning of the message is, how the message is received. So that is tying into that human element that you're talking about. Because you could think that this is what's important to this set of engineers, but until you really understand the emotion behind that, and that's my question is, how do we start as leaders to really derive the emotion behind something? And how important is emotion in this whole marketing approach that you're talking about that's empowered by AI? How do we extract that emotion, discover what really matters, and use that emotion to resonate and drive better conversion or even just better value for our customers?
So I love the word harness in that situation. Harness and activate, right?
Yeah, not exploit.
Look, again, I think people, what is that? We talked about this earlier. When people reveal who they are, listen, right?
Hmm.
I'm a big fan of what I call human pruning. Like the door's always open, but thank you for revealing yourself. I've got somewhere else to go, right? We all
Mhm.
create our own data set, right, in our personal lives. Before I get to the enterprise answer to your question, I will give you an example in something, and it came out of this class with these senior women. So I find fascinating on a personal level, again, to try and get people who perhaps don't quite know where to start. And organizations a lot of times don't quite know where to start, right? This is it, right. But on a personal level, what's so interesting is think, and this is, I can only speak for myself. I think for a lot of women, they have thought that there's only one personality type that can really, you need to be a leader of a particular, like there's a blueprint, you
Yep.
just need to follow it. And so tone and style files. And ironically, this somewhat mirrors, I think, in an enterprise level that professionalism or whatever it is, there's only one way to be. Like I get that people have comfort levels, but I think that authenticity, you said this just between us girls before we started, that people really experience authenticity in a way, it goes back to your point, how it's delivered, whether visually or verbally. I think the sentiment, people always can hear that. So what was really interesting in a masterclass that I did for a women's group that I'm on, Steer Co-op, in talking about people's LinkedIn profiles and creating, because you're trying to walk not only companies, right? You're trying to walk a particular line with what is my brand. And what's so interesting about people in sales marketing, argue you're a closeted marketer, but that's me. And by the way, my profession, the door is open for you. You're always welcome in our world.
There we go.
I think it's so interesting that when people are trying to figure out, because your LinkedIn profile is in a way your personal website, right? It is searchable. How do you talk about yourself? And I think that there are people that give zero flavor. This mirrors what we were talking about at an enterprise level for a company, right? They have zero flavor in their marketing because it's kind of, this is what we do and we're going to get volume and we're just blah, blah. You talked about your cut and paste kind of thing that you evolved from, because I think when you know yourself, you're okay. You trust your own voice. What I have found interesting for a lot of people that have some years in their career is hopefully as you mature, you get more comfortable with who you are and you're more aligned to who you are. I still think that you want to curate. I don't say anything about my family or my personal life. I'm a very personable person. I have likes, dislikes. I obviously have a personality. I never talk about and other women were saying, I'm never sure, like I can't decide. Do I post something about my kids? Or LinkedIn is a professional network, but the people that do it successfully obviously use those things and propel off of that onto a leadership. That's when I think it's very interesting and you've woven it together to something authentic and perhaps unusual. What is interesting, back to your precision comment, is that it's not unlike when people write collateral or anything else and they talk feature functions versus the layer above that, which is the precision and the knowing and the hearing from clients, where why you said it, what creates value for you? How do I tell because you don't, it's the same thing with AI, right? If you tend to see it as a task thing, you're missing the whole point. I'm sorry, I'm taking a long time to spit this story out. What was interesting was to say to these women, find a job or whatever, where you just go, wow, that's me, that's whatever, even if you're not looking for a job. What's interesting is to your point with the NLP thing, it's hard to tell people what would that feel like. Which again, when you're selling a future state and you're trying to get people to change their minds and not see and calibrate to where they are, but where they could be. Because when you've already decided that you've received it, that's when it's like, it's a sync up. And what's so interesting in this women's event was saying to people, like, if you upload your resume and you upload where you want to go and you ask AI, who doesn't know you, it's not like your in-law or whatever kind of work colleague that's, if I'm 10 pounds less than you, I'm a better human or whatever. If I have more square footage in my office, whatever the hierarchy is in their head, AI doesn't calibrate to any of that. It sees better future state. It will show you a map to getting from here, wherever you think you are, to here. And what's funny, it's not biased. It hasn't, so it's funny, I think, for people to have something come back to them. And I've seen this because I've done it for friends where it's like, what? And I was like, I've told you that it's possible for you to be there, but you need to see the evidence of what it is. So pivoting from personal to, I think the same is true in really good sales conversations and really good go-to-market materials or sales enablement or whatever. You're not just pushing and talking at them with future state. You're trying to get them to believe in a future state. That's all. That to me is what sales is.
And then so the emotion piece, we need to understand the messages or the things that really matter, right? You talk about feature functionality. It's not necessarily that your product can do this thing. It's that when that person uses your product, and even we're going to go a few levels deep here, it's not even that your product does that thing. And it's not even that usually, that product, when it does that thing, produces X result for that person in the business. It's actually that because it produced that result in the business, they're going to have more time, more peace of mind. It's something they won't have to do anymore. They'll be able to be a little bit lazier in their own respect. I can't remember if that was you or if that was in my last podcast, but people like to be lazy at certain times, right? That like they don't have to do 100 things.
You want to have the choice to have them, right? To me, it's the difference between hustle and grind. No one wants to. Hustle is you personally motivated to do whatever the thing is that you want to do. And if it's zero, then that's zero. Grinding is you're in overwhelm and you don't have a choice. And that's how I differentiate and add some texture to what you're saying.
There we go. Well said. And then even from not having to do that thing, they're able to do more of the thing that produces the results. Maybe it's money, they're on a faster trajectory to their goals. And that means that they're closer to that thing in their life, more time with the people they care about, just better performance. I think a lot of people that are exceptional professionals get a lot of joy from when things work very well. And so it's just there's so many levels deeper that the things that matter to that person. But so then in our marketing, in our sales, how can we get deeper into that emotion at scale? Or is that something, or is there's certain approaches that we have to utilize to do? Tell us about how important that emotion is.
Great question. And here is where I think what I find fascinating is, depending on how mature the company is, right? You have these voice of the customer programs, surveys, you do this, you do that, which is just a very organized way of listening to people, right? I think is interesting, if people are up to it, is when you're able to, I use fireflies, right? I like a good aggregating transcripts.
Yeah.
Because I think people, when you talk to them for a period of time, and if you're inquisitive, which you are when you're a good salesperson, and you facilitate a great conversation, I think being able to aggregate all of them, and that to me is a process that hopefully you have a workflow around that and you're listening. I think historically people have done things like focus groups and voice the customer and these different things that are great because sometimes either people want to be in a room and talk about their mutual whatever, or it's a competitive advantage to keep it to yourself and because you're a problem and you're like, I'm not sure. You know what I mean? For me, it's the harnessing component That's how I would get the outcome that I think that you're talking about. How do you get more granularity and personal? How do you create an environment and then mine people articulating their challenges?
By the way, you're just feeding me absolute gold over here, Sam. Loving it.
I would like a little JMP that, with myself, but when they used to have subway tokens, the guy that originally designed the subway token put his 3 initials in the old subway tokens in one line of code. I just want a little JMP.
Deal.
Does that resonate with you? Because I think that you're
Oh, for sure.
like my experience of you is that you have an inquisitive mind. You move things. I enjoy when you can intellectually spar with someone, and it moves you. Sometimes what I found interesting about the way the environment that you set is from a place of curiosity, but and you're someone that values authenticity in yourself and others. And I think that you try and create that environment. But I would be curious if you pulled a bunch of really, really good sales guys. I would think that you would start to see the same pattern and this goes back to when you have more time, you're able to do what they used to call high touch, right? Or like more personal conversations. That's what's so funny about AI. It allows, while people are getting wackadoodle about the fact that it's going to take their job or whatever it is, if you're leveraging it properly, the high value stuff, you're able to do more of it. You said it earlier. I think it's really satisfying for marketing and salespeople when you see someone else and you've been able to deliver that future state for them.
So this connects to something that a personal experience that I had just in respect to business. And that is that for the last 5 or so years, I started Manuka in 2020. That was my first, I'd done other companies and things before that since a young age, but that was the first one where I'm in the world and learning how the world really works, because you don't really learn that in college. You don't really learn that in high school necessarily. Of course, you can see the news and see the things going on, but until you're out there having responsibilities in your life, which we could start to see our customers differently as well through this lens. But you're beginning to learn the world works, what matters, and everything like that. I spent much of the last 5 years taking and innovating from the outside in versus the inside out. And so you talk about with that group of women and some others that you have mentioned, some other stories about finding your true voice. And that, in essence, is also a deep personification of what discernment is, understanding when to take from the outside in or when to look from the inside and go out. Because ultimately, if you do get deep enough in your level of understanding of yourself, then AI will allow you to simply scale your voice. But I would say it's critical to dive deeper in and really discover your voice. So when it comes to that process, do you have any insights for people? You mentioned the thing about, let's say, with the resume to find that job, have AI chart the path so you can maybe see yourself in a different light to get there. How also can we go further and really understand what our voice is? Because it's probably not clear. A lot of things we do, if we go out and, hey, I'm going to make my LinkedIn page, you just do it. It goes back to the task thing. You're just doing it to fulfill the task so that if people look at your profile, they understand what you did. But it's really more about who you truly are. And from that place, you can derive a lot more value.
Great
Precision.
question. So 2 things that I advise. One actually was something that someone shared during the masterclass, which I thought was interesting. I will do this for friends. I will interview them a set of questions as if they were a product, because people don't see themselves as a product. They don't see their LinkedIn page. I'll try and say to people, like, it's hard to just off the top of your head because not everybody's in marketing. To your point, how do I create value? What do I do? So I will do this exercise for friends where I will create an interview and record them. And then we take the recording and we say, who is this person? Tell me about this person, because they can intonate from, depending on which language model you use or whatever model you use, it can intonate and give you clarity from a transcript about the person, which is why I like recording discovery calls, because you can get a lot of information. So what I find interesting is I think a lot of people think this is how I need to be, this is how I need to look, this is how I need to talk, whatever. So your authenticity a bit gets stripped away, and it's very uncomfortable for people to find not just their voice. Look, I'm from Detroit, and I do joke that I have a PhD from the streets, right? And I'm I'm not polished, but the greatest compliment I ever got was from someone is, you're a combination of grit and polish, Judith. And that's the nicest compliment you could give me, because you have to be real.
Mhm.
Again, the kind of polish part, which is how do people need to hear it? We've all seen people that have taken the kind of, okay, so you're being a little too personal, and everybody's got to walk that path of what feels comfortable. What I find more interesting is, again, people have imposter syndrome. So that's why it feels comfortable to just calibrate to this, whatever the thing is, right? As opposed to what's your version of that thing. Where I think AI can really help you, though, and again, it has zero bias. AI is not going to tell me you need to drop 15 pounds, Judith, like you never lost your COVID weight. Take whatever my experiences are, which when we express ourselves and we answer things, this is why, again, I go back to really great salespeople, get beyond the answer, and they really get to the person, and they know how to do that in a way that isn't manipulative. It's a way that it manipulates the situation so everybody benefits, right? Because if you tell me what you want, I can help you get there, but you have to be clear about what that is. And that to me is good sales. So it's interesting to tell people that aren't in sales, like, you got to get to know what your product is. How are you articulating what your value is? And sometimes I think when you don't know what that is, that's why I tell people, go look at a job spec where you're just like, wow, that is whatever. Because the way that somebody else has articulated what those qualifications are, you maybe would not even think about. I had a friend tell me, Judith, I forgot that I used to have to sell. And he's part of what makes you a decent marketing person is because you try and think about what sales needs to go do their job so they can activate, so they can co-create. You try and think about, hey, do we get more referrals versus leads? Okay, so then and so what's interesting to talk to people that maybe don't know themselves or are thinking like there's only one way for me to be. And again, when you see a cluster of companies who've been in the same industry for a long time, I joke that you could probably swap the logos on most of their thought leadership and you wouldn't know. There's zero personality.
True. Yeah.
And I think the same is true for a lot of, it speaks to discernment in differentiation, right? So you don't have discernment about yourself sometimes. You don't understand how you're different. Is it just your numbers and stats? To your point, how are you bringing whatever your unique brand of authenticity is? Do you mentor? Do you do this? Do you do that? Yes, you're ticking a box. And who knows how people make decisions, who they're going to partner with, who they're going to, everybody's got an agenda, whatever. You need to do your best. But if you're leaving it on the field and at least your best version of yourself is being represented, then I think you can walk away from a no or somebody doesn't respond to you. It was interesting talking to people, and again, we're all senior women, and to just say, writing an article is like, ooh, I don't know if I want to do that. Or sometimes your company might not let you. I feel like everybody can write an article on leadership. No company's not going to say, don't write an article on leadership. They might sponsor you, but it's your LinkedIn profile unless they're paying for it. But it's cringeworthy to see people go, I don't know if I can do that. You know what I mean? So I'm like,
Yeah.
if nothing else, record yourself. If you don't want to have a friend help you and you're feeling uncomfortable, like nobody's looking.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example that's not so flattering for me, but I found it funny. I had someone reach out to me and asked me in a demeaning way, did I want to take their course or whatever? And again, I'm not above education. It's something that I had been teaching on. And again, this isn't an ego thing. It was just more like the way they wrote it was slightly demeaning. And this speaks to discernment. So I was like, I just couldn't figure out how to respond. So I wrote in the prompt, I would like a very passive aggressive, snarky, but I was very super clear because I was mad. And what was funny about the response, which I was startled by, because it was pretty decent, I was just like, wow, if I would get that clear when I'm trying to do X, Y, or Z in a positive way, right? It was a great example of get super clear about what the outcome is. I clearly wanted this person to, which isn't normally the way that I am, but I think it's an interesting exercise. It's hard to talk about yourself when you're writing a prompt.
Right. And that actually gets to the story or the connection to the statement that I said earlier, which is this year I learned the difference between people who are genuine and authentic, which oftentimes we think that's the highest bar one can achieve, and between those who are genuine and authentic and those who are the same but also trustworthy. And that really is discernment. That is what you need to do also with AI, because you can get a response and it can be genuine and it seems authentic, but you can't trust the quality of that output necessarily, right? Blindly. You have to be able to discern and say, this is what matters to my customer, this doesn't. Essentially, the other part there is emotion channels. So emotion is very important, which was the question there, right? In essence, that was your answer, because emotion in a human experience is what channels us to be much more clear. Because those experiences that I had, which brought out that insight, the authenticity and genuineness versus trustworthiness, were things that made me extremely angry. And it was through that that I became much more clear about
I'm going to pause for a second. That was genius what you just said. That was very genius what you just said.
Thank you. And yeah, it's that emotion that channels us and harnesses us and focuses us on what really matters and how we can be more clear. And so if we, as marketers, as salespeople, venture out deeper into the world of emotion, because it's going to generate a wonderful response for you, but you need to get deeper into that emotion that drives yourself if you want to really find that voice within you, or get deeper with your clients and be comfortable going into that level of depth about what really matters to them, what drives them, and why your product is important or why your message should resonate with them. That emotion is the higher order that we should seek to bring to the forefront.
It's not to get too personal, but I started meditating this year. By the way, I baby meditate, which is just 10 things I'm grateful for, 3 people I need to forgive, and I'm frequently on the forgiveness list, or I have repeat offenders that I show. And then the last part, which somebody taught me, is wouldn't it be wonderful if? And what's interesting is I hadn't really thought of this. To write a prompt from a place of wouldn't it be wonderful if, and to write what you do want versus what you don't want. Which I think is interesting, the way that you were talking about emotion and how to get to pure emotion. Because pure emotion, good or bad, hopefully more good than bad, when you're trying to create, hopefully you're not creating from fear. You're creating from opportunity. Really good sales and marketing. People sell from fear versus the opposite of that, future state.
But don't fear the emotions that can be called negative either.
But again, through contrast, it's like if you know what you don't want, then really frame out what you do. To me, all fear can also be reframed in, okay, so that's what you don't want, or that's what you have now. What is the future state of where it could be? To your point, what's so interesting is, wouldn't it be wonderful if, fill in the blank, you had 4 hours to go? What's so interesting about me discovering my own company's tools, I did it because I was feeling such overwhelm. I've worked at big companies. I've worked at small.
Yep.
This is a startup. What really fueled me was like, WTF, how am I going to get anything done? So I was just like, I got to figure this out. And I'm fortunate that the leadership in my company, again, they're all nerdy engineers who solved growth challenges with technology. And they were like, let's sit down. Let's figure this out. It was never just, hey, just do more. It was, hey, figure out how to use the tools to get to a better state. And I was like, I would not call myself a natural technologist. You know what I mean? And it was like, once you get in that place of possibility, then to your point, would 4 extra hours a week mean that you could play around with technology or write those notes to customers to follow up or what? That's the kind of stuff that nags at you. It's always the small they're not stupid, but the small things that take your personal time and your attention that you can't get to, that are normally, like, when you want to write those notes to somebody because you really do care, like, you do want to follow up, you do want to have that connection with them. And to your point earlier, more personality and more authenticity normally brings out a experience. You obviously want more of those.
And to that part about, too, that you said and shared with the senior women about so they were saying it was cringe. They were worried that what they would be doing was cringe. And so there's a really good example of this. You could look at even my first interviews in this, or there's another good one. It's Marcus Brownlee. Are you familiar with that YouTuber? He does a lot of the Marquise, I believe it is Marquees, Brownlee, spelled how it sounds, Brownlee. So he has a video. He's a YouTuber. He's millions of subscribers now, but he has a video from it was his very first video. He was like 12 years old or something. And he's just this little kid with a raggly voice. And he's like, I'm going to review this product. And now he makes videos and hey, I'm inside a Tesla, 26 or 28, maybe my age or something like that. And so he's been making videos for 14 years and that improvement, the growth, the finding your voice doesn't always need to come from just thinking because we get caught in our thinking. And sometimes it's hard to access those emotions. But if we go out and we expose ourselves and we expose ourselves to that kind of vulnerability, that kind of risk, the fact that you could look back 10 years later and be like, oh my God, I can't believe it was like that. But then, that's the process at which it takes. You have to refine yourself. So there's a balancing between deep introspection, reflection, using AI to explore, and those kind of things, but then also just going for it, testing, figuring it out.
Great point. And one of the things that I said during the session was just be playful, be frisky, be funny. Nobody's watching. Nobody's grading you. So many of the things that we do, again, we calibrate to what people are thinking about us. The closer you get to yourself and listening to yourself more, the less you're going to care about other people become irrelevant. Doesn't mean they're not important, but other things and voices become irrelevant the larger your own data set is, which I would argue is authenticity. But I'm saying to these people, like, nobody's watching. Nobody's grading you. Just get in there. I don't even care if you start by, again, like I joked, writing a snarky email that you've always wanted to or a script, or just get busy and get your hands dirty with nobody watching. Nobody's going to score you. So I think that's so interesting. Even if you write an article for yourself, put it aside, pick it up. You'll be on the treadmill. I get my best ideas from the treadmill, where it's, oh, wow, that all of a sudden makes sense to me. Who cares? Nobody's grading you. Nobody, whatever. Fail. Just get your hands dirty and get involved.
It's to wrap the concept of discernment in this. We always embed critical thinking as the most important thing, and it's very valuable, of course. But very good thinking, quality thinking, often comes from some degree of emotion. I'm
going to be percolating on that on the treadmill tomorrow, Jacob. And by the way, you're going to end up in tomorrow's I'm grateful list. And wouldn't it be wonderful? You're in 2 sections of my meditation tomorrow.
Nice. Good vibes, positivity. So as a next step or a takeaway for listeners, what is that one thing? Is it to build that list and go meditate on it? Or what would be the one thing that our founders, our entrepreneurs and professionals can do right away in their life to make it better?
Aside from the technology stuff, which obviously I'm an advocate, I do find that if I start my day by not looking at my phone, and I do start my day by the 10 things I'm grateful for, it does. I read something that said an emotion only lasts for 90 seconds. Might have been Mel Robbins or something, because I'm listening to the let them theory, which is fascinating to me. It creates a moat between me and whatever somebody said. But for me, I do find that this dovetails, I think, ironically, to authenticity, and kind of authenticity to me is the highest form of discernment, because it's your own discernment when you think about it, which I hadn't really, gave me that thought. So thank you. I do find that caring how I'm thinking is the thing that just it activates everything and it sets the tone for everything. If I don't, that's me personally though. I just decided that if I don't like a thought I'm having and I don't feel good, and normally you don't feel good because you're having a crappy thought, I just have decided that wouldn't it be wonderful if I say that by the time I get to 10 or 15 things, and there are tons of things to be grateful for, right? My attitude has changed. You don't normally find an answer from fear, right? When you're an entrepreneur, when you're trying to innovate, when you're trying to grow, when you're trying to solve anything, to your point, you normally don't. You get the answer when you're not thinking about it and you're coming from a place of possibility. So to set your mental environment up, like that is something that I wish I would have learned sooner. And that's me just sitting down and just going, wouldn't it be wonderful if for 10 or 15 things, by the time I'm done, I'm normally in a pretty decent mood and things look pretty different.
So take those exercises and go ahead and apply them. Judith, it's been wonderful to have you on the show. Episode 48 of Titans of Today is complete.
Thanks.
And we will include links to everything that you're doing, your LinkedIn and whatnot down below.
Seriously, great conversation. And I'm really grateful for what you're doing and what you're creating in the world. So thank you, Jacob.
We'll keep being out there. So we'll see you more. Thanks, Judith. Hey everyone, thank you for watching this episode of Titans Up Today. What did you learn from it? Make sure to drop a comment below with your most valuable insight so that other people can engage in the conversation around what this speaker brought to the table. And then on another front, make sure to subscribe so that every time we drop a new episode, you will be notified. And that way you can keep fueling your dreams and your brain with fresh insights which can help you along your journey and along your path to your goals. So thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next interview.